Hello, everyone. Charles Banfield here again with another Karate Canucks conversation. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Sensei Doug Knispel. Sensei Knispel began his martial arts journey in 1980 at the tender age of 8 years old and has never looked back. Currently, he holds an 8th degree black belt in Kitsune-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu under O Sensei Steve Reynolds, and a 1st degree black belt in Goju Ryu Karate under Sensei Hugh Smith. He's also the chief instructor at the Richmond Hill Budokan, which offers instruction in traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, as well as weapons training, training in Tai Chi, and other various other wellness activities. An active member of the Canadian martial arts community for more than 40 years, Sensei Knispel is a former medalist at the World Sport Jiu-Jitsu Championships. I believe it was a bronze medal you'd mentioned, and has led several of the students to national and world titles, in some cases multiple national and world titles. He's also the president of the Ontario Jiu-Jitsu Association, director with the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association, and is the chairman of the Ontario Jiu-Jitsu Association Black Belt Grading Board. And each of these roles he's held for at least 10 years, and in some instances, much longer. And when he's not teaching, I guess on Zoom or now in person again, after a long wait, he can be found donating his time, delivering seminars in support of local causes, which is how I had the opportunity to meet him, and is a regular fixture at the annual Capital Conquest event, which is the official World Kobudo Federation event for North America that is run by Hanshi John Tidian out of the Ottawa area. So welcome, Sensei Knispel. It's, again, a real pleasure to speak with you again today.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here. Like you say, we met at the seminar. We had a really good session there, and I was pleasantly surprised to receive your invitation. So I'm looking forward to it. It's an honor, and I'll do my best to be interesting, as I've said. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, just say what comes naturally, I think is the best way to go about it. And we'll let others judge on how interesting we are. So it goes both ways here. So, so how these things go, and I know you've watched a number of them. We're going to start with just some basic questions, and we'll sort of drill down into some areas as they present themselves. So why don't we start with some general background about you, like where you're from, where did you grow up, and what prompted you to start your martial arts journey?
Yeah, sure. Born and raised in Thornhill, Ontario, Canada. Still live there. My parents actually immigrated to here from Scotland in the late 60s, 67 and 68. They came at a very young age to kind of make their life here and ultimately make a better life for my brother and myself. So, let me say I was actually born at Newmarket Hospital, and I've grown up and I still live in Thornhill. As far as martial arts, like you said, I started when I was 8 years old. That was 41 years ago now, hard to believe. But what had happened was I had recently switched schools. We had moved, and I had to switch schools. And I experienced some bullying. I've been wearing glasses like this since I was 2, so and before I got dumped on my head a lot, I was pretty smart in school, so that made me a bit of a target for the bullying. And it got to the point where I wouldn't go to school without an escort. My parents had to take me to school, which is really funny because my dad and I talk about that now. And you say, well, everyone takes their kids to school now, but back in 1980, that wasn't so good. My pregnant mother was walking me to and from school, and they decided something had to be done. So my dad worked at a local high school in Richmond Hill, and he happened to catch a jiu-jitsu demonstration or martial arts demonstration. What happened was the local school came in to do a demo on the lunch hour to drum up membership. It was one of the things you did back then. And My father was suitably impressed with the demonstration and talked to the instructor who gave the demonstration, asked him if he taught kids and things like that. And then he talked to some of the students that he knew who went to the school and asked them about the club and whatnot, and was suitably impressed. So I remember them coming. Well, I remember him coming and talking to me, and my parents talking to me about maybe this is something that you could do. Learn a little martial arts. Learn how to stand up for yourself and get a bit of confidence there, so you're not getting bullied. So I don't remember being that keen on it. I wasn't really like into. I mean, in 1980, things are a little different, right? The Bruce Lee era was still. Bruce Lee was still a dominant force. He had passed away 7 years earlier. Chuck Norris was kind of on his upswing, right? So I had an inclination of what sort of karate and judo and things like that were. I never really heard of jiu-jitsu, but I wouldn't say I was like a huge martial arts fan at the time. It was just something my parents thought would be a good idea. So I agreed to go and watch, and we went and watched the class. I remember my dad, we were in the little office in the club, and my dad was talking to the instructor that was there. It wasn't the chief instructor. I never met him right away. But he was talking to the person in charge of classes that night. And I watched some students train. They were just doing freestyle training, so a lot of punching, kicking, throwing, locking. I remember being a little scared of the throwing, worrying that it was hurting. You know, they're going to get hurt. They're going to get hurt. And they lied to me and told me the break falls didn't hurt. So once you learned how to do it, you were fine. It's a bit of a joke, but it was an introduction in any case, right? So we went home. My dad was pretty good. My mother and father were really good. We had a chat about it. Again, I don't know that I was incredibly keen, but obviously I didn't want to keep getting bullied. So I went and tried a class. I agreed to go try a class, and I remember my first class vividly. I still hadn't met the chief instructor, but I was put with one of the newly minted black belts, and I remember getting a little tour of the dojo. To a kid, it seemed huge, but really, in reality, I think it was pretty small. The mat area was always the same size, so it was probably pretty small, but to a little guy, it looked huge. But there were weapons on the wall that I remember being fascinated with. There was a bow and sai, and he had throwing stars up and a sword. So I remember being fascinated by that. And then we started the class, and I remember doing like crazy exercises I couldn't do, push-ups and sit-ups and things like that. Some flexibility training, so stretching, stuff I'd never really done. Always been keen on sports, but I was kind of clumsy and whatnot. But Jesus, I remember sweating like I'd never sweat before. And then my first lesson kind of consisted of sitting in a horse stance and learning how to punch. So we did that for another hour or so, and that was clocked in my first class. So then I remember going home, and we had a chat about it, and my parents were very clear. If we're going to do this, you're making a commitment to it. We're forking out good money for this, right? And the good money back then, I think, was $20 for the lessons, and then to get a uniform was maybe another $20 or $25. So for $50, this was a big commitment back in the day. $50 was a lot of money for a working family, right? So it was made clear to me that if you're making a commitment, you're going to see it through. So signed up for classes, and like I say, 41 years later, I'm kind of still at it, sitting in a horse stance punching. But I'm still at it in any case. A couple weeks later, I remember meeting the chief instructor for the first time, and I remember that class vividly. Because it was packed, there were a lot of people there. And I remember the energy being different when he was on the mats. A lot of it was like a good tension, right? Everyone knew they were in for a heck of a workout, and that they best be doing their best. So had a great class. The workout was harder, anything was hard at that time, but it was really difficult. And I remember I got the chance to spar. And that was a big thing, right? So it was like hand and foot fighting. So just no throws or takedowns. We just did karate style sparring.
Yeah.
And I remember I won. So this was like the greatest thing ever. I beat him, right? And I remember going home with my father and saying, "Oh, how hard can this be? I beat him," all right? And he said, "You know, he let you win, right?" So back to reality very quickly. But that was my introduction. The chief instructor was my sensei, Steve Reynolds, and like I say, 41 years later, he's still my sensei. So that's kind of my introduction story.
Yeah, I was going to say when your father, just hit you with the truth bomb that you didn't really win, he let you win. Did you already know that there was no Santa Claus and stuff at that point, or was that later on?
Yeah, it was. Well, no, I kind of suspected, but yeah, I remember being well chuffed with myself that I'd won, and then of course he brought me back to reality, which is what was needed, right, to make sure I keep going and doing all the rest of it. So I just remember it being a really fun night, and I remember it being a great feeling. My teacher was always really good at. The workout would be incredibly hard. Don't get me wrong. He would. The training was a little different, of course, right? But you'd get sort of beaten down in class, but you'd always leave with a smile on your face. So he'd always give you like a cookie at the end, right? You'd always leave feeling really good, right? Even if he'd been yelling at you in the class or you couldn't do anything right in the class, he always made sure you left feeling really awesome. Right, and that's one of his gifts too, right? I mean, he just has this ability to motivate, right?
Right. So how would you said the training was different back then? How would you characterize the training then versus now, and how you instruct now? Like what was it like, and how has it evolved? Would you say, or has it?
So, I think the training has evolved. I think we train a lot smarter now, for sure. There are things we know about exercise and how to move the body and how to train the body that we just that wasn't the done thing back then, right? Martial artists were supposed to be tough back in the day, right? You were training to fight, or you were training to defend yourself, right? It was taken with sort of that seriousness. You have to remember, 1980 was before the Karate Kid and sort of that selling the life skills portion that's often sold now, right? It was still very focused on the physical technique. The dojo itself was a pretty Spartan environment, right? We were underneath a doctor's office in a basement, and you'd go down and you could smell the sweat, right? This wasn't a nice, bright, open dojo space. We had mats. They had just gotten mats, and I use the term mats loosely. The mats were 1.5 inch high-density foam, so a very thick carpet under padding with a canvas sail cover, right? So that was their mat laid on concrete. We had a heavy bag. That was a cool thing, and there were 3 kick pads, right? So it was a very Spartan training environment, or focus shields, right? And everyone thinks, I'm sure you've been around martial arts enough now that you know everyone has their fish story, right? Oh, the training was so much harder in my day that we did. To some extent it was, but we didn't necessarily do the best thing for our bodies either. The generation before me, I mentioned we had just gotten mats. So the dojo itself started in 1973. It started in a judo club. They had tatami there, right? So they had a nice start. When Sensei Reynolds got his own place, the Jiu-Jitsu Kai at the Bayview Plaza where I started, there were no mats. So the first generation of students did their Jiu-Jitsu training on a linoleum floor. So guys like Mr. Hugh Smith that you know, they did their Jiu-Jitsu training on a linoleum floor. Right, and they took the full gamut. Right, they were taking falls, they were doing break falls. Right, so that generation had a little rougher for sure. They went to a YMCA for a little bit, did classes there for a couple of years, and then we got back to the Bayview Plaza with our own space. And they got these mats, and that's what we trained on. But we would do things like if we were running outdoors, it was always barefoot. You were toughening your feet. It didn't matter what the weather was doing. The warm up, the classes were long, so a couple hours, hour and a half, and a good half of that was training. The training itself, right? The shinai was my friend, right? If you made a mistake, you were told, and usually got a rap with the shinai, and you were told to do better, right? And I certainly don't. I find I can motivate students without having to hit them and yell at them and do that sort of thing. But my instructor was a military man. Much of the martial arts and the way it was taught back then was sort of militaristic. So you do what you know, and then when you know better, you do better. And I like to think that the training's evolved, that we know better. And you also have to consider your audience as well, right? I mean, in my dojo, I have a lot of children. Well, before COVID, I had a lot of kids. I have some teenagers that started with me as kids. I don't have a lot of kids in their 20s or anything like that. But then the next demographic, I have a lot of people over 40, 50. The oldest student in my dojo is 74, 75 years old. So how am I gonna motivate him with a shinai? That's just ridiculous, right? I mean, we can train hard, and we can learn the technique, and we can certainly spar with intensity and do that. But I don't need to yell at anyone and I don't need to hit people with shinai and things like that to make a difference or to get quality results.
Right.
So I think and I think society has changed a great deal as well, right? So you wouldn't get away with it.
No, expectations have definitely changed over the years. Yeah, for sure. We were talking a little bit before we started recording here, and we're throwing around a few names. You know, Hugh Smith was one of them, or I should say Sensei Hugh Smith was one of them. So I've done some training with him, Chito-Ryu training. He's kind of come to our club. And then you mentioned that the what is now called Richmond Hill Karate, when it was, I guess, owned and run by Sensei Bill Sarantos. You guys were sharing, and you know, was there some crossover with the training there? Like, were you ever on the floor at the same time as the Chito-Ryu guys, or was it their time is done and then?
Yes. So they used to take the dojo on off nights. So the dojo wasn't open 7 days a week. So Mr. Sarantos, or Sensei Sarantos, and my instructor actually had met Sensei Sarantos. It's funny you should mention, at the beginning of COVID, Sensei Sarantos actually called here, and I chatted to him for a good hour or so. So it was just a funny happenstance. But my sensei had met Mr. Sarantos. He owned a business on Elgin Mills. I think it was car detailing or something like that way back in the day. And Sensei Reynolds was looking for a sponsor for his martial arts tournament that we used to hold, right, to sponsor trophies or something, right? And they hit it off, and Mr. Sarantos said, well, you know, I should support you because I own a karate club in Willowdale, and we should support each other. And then eventually Willowdale Karate moved up to our dojo and shared space with us for a number of years. And I think some of the students definitely did some cross training. Sensei Hugh Smith was one of them. He trained under Mr. Sarantos and Sensei Ferry, or Kyoshi Ferry now, sorry, and the family, and Mr. Fenn and people like that who were the senior students back then. And my dad did a bit of Chito-Ryu training. I remember I think I may have taken a class, but Mr. Sarantos was very tough. Those classes were impossibly tough. Here's another thing, right? During class, Mr. Sarantos was a taskmaster on the floor. And after class, he was like the nicest guy in the world. They'd go to the restaurant after, have a coffee or whatever they were drinking, and he'd be like totally different from the way he was on the mats. It's like a transformation came over. So yeah, there was some cross training back in the day for sure, and we were all friendly with one another. It wasn't like, oh, no, it was an open door sort of policy, and I think that's the nature of my teacher, right? Sensei Reynolds always had a really open door policy. It wasn't unusual for really high level people to come in and share the mat. They'd give some to, maybe he'd teach them some jujitsu, and we'd have the benefit of learning from them, whether we were sparring or doing whatever. So it's a very sort of open environment, and something I kind of preserve to this day. If people come by and train, they're made to feel very welcome, and we love visitors for sure.
Yeah. So I have an answer in mind, but I'm going to ask you this question. So, there's been some, I guess, very successful students that have gone through your school that are still there now over the years. That some people come and go. Who would you say is probably the most famous of your either former instructors or cohorts or students?
So out of the peers, yeah. So not my peers. The generation before me, there was. I think everyone knows the name Harold Howard as Canada's first UFC fighter. His original training was at the Richmond Hill Jiu-Jitsu Kai. He was Sensei Reynolds' student. He actually had started at the Kai Shin Dojo in Richmond Hill, but eventually he came to the Jiu-Jitsu Kai, and he was kind of the same class. So they started around 1975, and he got his black belt in just around the time I started, so 1980. Him and Mr. Smith and a few others. There was about 5 people who got their black belts at the same time. They had all started in 1975, and around the time I started, that's when they had been sort of newly minted black belts. But Harold Howard, definitely probably the most famous fighter to come out of the dojo way back when, right?
Yeah. I've heard some, great stories with him. Like from all accounts, from what I could gather, he was a great guy. My instructor, Sensei Romaldo Ferri, tells a story where he was sparring with him, and somehow he tweaked his back or whichever, and he said Sensei Howard, picked him up and carried him over. They were just trying to beat the hell out of each other, and then he turned it right away, and it was nothing but kind and caring, right after.
Yeah, he's all my seniors. I started at a time where kids, we didn't have a dedicated kids class when I started, right? We had a beginners class and we had an advanced class, and the advanced class is basically, once you knew how to do a break fall, you could take the advanced class, but there were no specific children's classes, and kids typically would last until maybe orange belt, green belt, and if once the training got a little more difficult, they kind of gravitated away. So I was like the runt of the litter. I was everyone's kid brother, and pushed and coddled and looked after, and the seniors were all very good to me. Guys like Sensei Smith and Sensei Howard and the other black belts of the day, right? They were all very kind to me and looked after me. And Sensei Howard was definitely one of the ones I've always had a really fine relationship with, right? And despite what's happened over the years, right? I mean, he's still, to us kids back then, he was a hero, right? We all wanted to be like him, right? He's what, 6'4", tall, blonde Adonis, really good at the arts, fought like a man. He was very much someone we wanted to be like us little guys anyway. But no, they were all very kind to me and looked after me really well. And he fought hard, but yeah, he had that kind side to him as well that came out through, like Sensei Ferri says, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, he's definitely an interesting person. I remember when the UFC first came out, I guess it was back in the early to mid 90s, and he He was impressive. That's for sure.
It's funny. It's funny you should say that. We watched that live, of course, the UFC 3, the first one he was in, and of course we're cheering him on. That was he was Canada's first, right? But my mother was there at the time, and I remember her being shocked at how mean Harold was in the first in his first match there, where he went crazy, where he really pounded that Thai boxer, and oh, I can't believe Harold's like that, right? She was shocked that he was that, and I'm thinking, weren't you watching? But no, she was. I remember her being amazed at how mean he was, or how intense he was in the ring. So that was kind of a funny story around that, because she had a different impression. Mr. Howard was always very polite to her and like very kind, right? So she didn't think that this nice boy could be that intense type of thing, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, definitely he had a go button that he could push.
Absolutely.
So back when you were talking about, you know, how you kind of came to the martial arts, and you were mentioning, you know, you're having issues with, you know, bullying and things like that, you know, when you were in school. I don't want to assume, but, you know, I will assume, did the fact that you enrolled in the martial arts that you ended up training, did that help alleviate that issue, or I guess where I'm going?
Actually, it was a help, and it was just. I think it was little things like you carried yourself a little better. It wasn't that I went out and beat the crap out of people by any stretch of the imagination. It certainly talked my way out of enough confrontation. I remember in high school, grade 9s typically went through a rite of passage where the higher grades would come and beat on the minor 9ers or do something like stuff them in a locker, and they did try that, and it didn't go so well. But nothing. I never had to really fight. It was more the way I carried myself now, and just I think the confidence that you get from good training in martial arts helped me, right? But by no means was I was never really a problem at school or anything like that. I was a goody two shoes, as my mother would say, right? I didn't get into trouble or anything like that.
Yeah. So aside from the bullying that seemed to, you know, resolve itself over time, is there anything that you can say, like, you know, how your martial arts experience training has helped you overcome challenges, you know, whether they're personal, professional, otherwise? I've heard you, you know, and seen you online, you know, commenting about, you know, the pandemic and what a challenge this has been, you know, with trying to keep the dojo moving and so on. You know, do you think that your martial arts experience has helped you analyze situations and come at them in a way that makes it easier for you to survive, perhaps, than if you didn't have that background?
I think the lessons that you get in perseverance and just the work ethic, to be sure. I mean, work ethic was drilled into me. I mean, not only through martial art. I mean, so just to backtrack, one of the greatest things that probably happened was 3 months after I started jiu-jitsu. My father joined up. Sensei Reynolds did the best sales job ever on my dad. So, well, you come and watch your son anyway. You might as well sign up. Just join for the exercise. Don't worry about it, right? So he did, and he got hooked in a large way, right? And I told the story on the PKCC podcast. He still got his black belt the fastest in here, 3.5 years, and he was intense and he was good, and there's still a keen analytic mind with jiu-jitsu, and still trains. We still go do things together. But that work ethic was built in. My dad at that time was 33 years old when he started, and the next oldest student was probably in their 20s, right? So he was there keeping up with the 20-year-olds and trying to do that. But commitment was hammered into me. Being on time was hammered into me, quite literally. But that work ethic was always there, and you stick to it, right? If you're gonna make a commitment to something, you see it through. Now for jiu-jitsu, it was quite easy for me. I fell in love with the art probably in my teens, right? When things started really working, and I figured out the leverages a little better, had a bit of strength to back me up for some of the techniques. I mean, I could make joint locks and stuff work from kind of the very beginning. I had a repertoire, but when I could start throwing people and getting my own in there, picking people up to do the bigger throws and whatnot, that's when I really probably fell in love with the art and developed that. But as far as the work ethic, right? When you see, like I say, when you have that commitment, you see it through. I mean, I mentioned that you mentioned in my intro, right? If I make a commitment, I generally stick to something for a long time. I've been doing martial arts for 41 years. I've been teaching it for 34 years. I've been at my job with the company I went with. I went from the paper route to my job, to the company anyway, not the same job, obviously. So I've been there 32 years. So you make a commitment. If it's good, you see it through, right? And if it works, then you do it. But so for the pandemic, I mean, that just changed the rules of everything. I don't think anyone could have foreseen being forced to shut your business. That had been never been done. I had been monitoring the situation, right? I knew about it when it was started. Okay, there's this virus coming out of China. I remember them saying, well, it's really not going to affect Canada. All right, it's not really going to affect, it's kind of contained to there. So you thought of it as a SARS thing, right? I'm sure you lived through the SARS experience. We didn't have to shut our businesses back then. Certainly we didn't have to go to any of this. I was expecting it to be more something like that. At the turn of the year, the turn of 2020, I mean, I really upped the sanitization in the dojo, right? I mean, because I was following it and I was on top of it. And so I really upped some of those processes already. I mean, the dojo was always clean anyway, but I really upped it and did a number there. And then, of course, in March, the world went upside down. So they said it was going to be 2 weeks. We took about a week off. We figured when we saw it wasn't getting any better, we pivoted, right? We found Zoom like so many others. Mm-hmm. And I did a test run on Zoom with some students to see how it would work and see if I could make it work. And I immediately started filming stuff on a private Zoom, a private YouTube channel to keep students engaged. And for anyone who knows me knows I absolutely detest being filmed, and especially if I'm doing something where it's put up publicly. Not, it's just me. It's not my most comfortable thing, but I got some stuff up there that keep my students practicing until I got the Zoom thing ready. The missus and I found out how to make Zoom work. We tested it and we flipped immediately. So we've been going on Zoom. Aside from the 3 months we were open between August and November, 3 months, August and November of last year, we've been on Zoom almost exclusively, and now we're kind of gearing up to get back into the dojo. We were able to do it on the 16th. We just had vaccinations, so I'm giving my vaccination the 2 weeks, and we'll be starting in-person classes after the long weekend in August. So that's what we're gearing up for. But if I didn't have the martial arts training to sit back and stay calm and kind of look at this thing logically, I mean, part of my job. I mentioned to you before, my job is all in planning, right? I plan software implementations for a living, right? So this planning stuff is my bread and butter. That's my career. So we figured out how to make this happen, and we stuck to it. Every week, the students get a newsletter from me. We film the classes so they can go back to recorded material, like we record the Zoom classes. If I introduce something new, and I'm fortunate that I have a breadth of knowledge that I was able to do that. I'm grateful for the fact that my sensei came up with a really significant solo-based curriculum. So we do kata and things like that. So I was able to keep people active. And I know a lot of jiu-jitsu clubs have faced trouble because they don't have that sort of the same solo work that we do, the weapons and some of the traditional items that we practice. But my training made that happen. I didn't qualify for any of the supports or anything like that. Part of it is the way I run this business, or the way we run this business. I don't draw a dime from Budo. Any money this dojo makes goes back into it. So if I'm lucky, I get a gi once in a while. But so that kind of hindered me with the supports. So if I didn't bust my ass, so to speak, and keep it going or remain dedicated to the cause, we wouldn't be talking here right now. I'd be at home instead. I wouldn't have this facility anymore. So it was either do something or let it die, and I wasn't about to let it die. So yeah, the training absolutely made that happen, and you make the pivot and you do what you have to do. More importantly, I kind of saw it as my role as the sensei to keep my students inspired or engaged or whatever you want, however you want to term it, right? But they needed that as well, right? Because you see what this pandemic's done to everyone. They needed some normalcy. Yeah. They needed something they normally do. All right, and I take that seriously, right? I care about my students, and obviously I want them to come back, and I'll be excited to see them on the 3rd of August inside my dojo again. But I think we all needed each other, and it was a pulling out, like a pulling together type of thing. We look after our own, we look after each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was helpful for you too, you know, like to have a bit of normalcy.
You need that. Absolutely, that routine.
Yeah,
that routine saved me for sure. It was important to keep doing. I mean, I would keep training regardless, right? I come in here and I do my stuff, but to be engaged with my students, I mean, you can't help. I've been teaching a long time, and I've had students that have been with me a long time. You want to see them, right? A gentleman I teach, I hadn't seen him. He works in the long-term care home, so he chose to stay away last summer just because he's on the front line. So he didn't come to the in-person training, and I hadn't. He always defers to me as sensei, but truthfully, he started 2 years after me and just stuck through it, right? But I hadn't seen him in over a year, and that's the first time in the 39 years he's been involved, I hadn't seen him for that long. So it's emotional when you get back together because you miss your peers, you miss your students, you miss your friends, right? So yeah. It was good that we finally came back together when outdoor training was allowed.
Yeah. So you've been involved, like you're pretty young to be somebody who's been doing this for 41 years, to this date, and I say that because you're younger than me. So I can say that you're pretty young. Yeah. But just curious, what would you say is the main thing that kept you involved all over that time? Was it the learning? Was it the opportunity to teach? Was it the camaraderie? Or was it something else? Sense of duty?
I think there's a number of things that probably did it. I think initially my dad joining really kept me going. There were times where he had to sort of kick my butt and say, "You're going. Don't forget the commitment you made." Right, that type of thing. I was never allowed to stop, but I was allowed to have other interests, and I think that was important when I was a kid. So I was in the Scouts. I did some work with the church I happened to attend at the time, right? So there were other things I did as well. So I was allowed to pursue other interests, so to speak, but I always had to make sure I was doing jiu-jitsu as well, right? That was important. And I think my dad and my mother wanted me to get my black belt. I had put all this time into something, but make sure you see it through. Probably the most challenging time is I often tell the story. I failed my blue belt test epically. So blue belt is second Q in our dojo. So you have to remember, I was the only kid that really stuck it out. So previous to me, there were two little older kids than me. They were around the time I started. They had gotten to blue belt, but they were teenagers, and life got in the way, and they kind of disappeared. But I was getting to a point that no other kid had gotten to, right? And I remember I failed the test epically. I was thrown out, right? That was it, right? And I didn't break down on the mats. I remember I bowed out. You accept your punishment or you accept your fate, right? And I went downstairs and got mad and broke down, but I wasn't allowed to stop, right? We had a good talk, and you decide, well, you go back, right? And a year later or 6 months later or whatever it was, I did end up getting the blue belt and going on, but that was one of those sort of transformative experiences that you push through a failure, and it was an epic failure, right? He hit the roof, so but it didn't break me, and I kept going. And then, like I say, when I got to 84, I was 12 at that time. I was starting to get a little bigger. I was filling out a little more, so around the time I was getting ready for black belt, when that sort of came into the fore, I fell in love with it, and I enjoy training. I got my black belt, probably the hardest test. Well, I think everyone's Shodan test is the hardest thing they ever do, and you push on. At Shodan, I kind of became my teacher's primary assistant in uke, so he saw something in me, and I kind of followed him around as a bag carrier for a lot of times. I took his throws and got the lessons that way. Over the years, after I got my Shodan, I kind of became his apprentice. I served a really long apprenticeship, and I have a really close relationship with him. Of all of his students, I've had the most mat time. I've had the most time with him doing jiu-jitsu or doing anything jiu-jitsu-wise than any of them. And it's benefited me, obviously. Actually, the reason I'm working for the company I work for is because of him. He got me the job, put in the good word for me, and that was at 16. So I kind of owe him my career. So we have a really important relationship. The term in Japanese is uchideshi. It kind of connotes a live-in student. I never lived with him, but certainly I did the things that I participated in his daily life, sort of that way, carrying his bags or making sure he had a uniform. I made sure that the only thing he had to focus on was the teaching, right? And it worked well. We would go do seminars together over time, and we still have a close relationship. So I'm very fortunate that way.
Do you feel you've had a hand in the evolution of the style that you train and teach? Because I know that Sensei Reynolds, or I guess O Sensei Reynolds, basically crafted his own version, I guess, of jiu-jitsu, and nothing is ever fully formed right at the start. So do you feel that you've played a role in the evolution of it?
Yes, maybe I'll step back just a bit. My instructor is Sensei Reynolds. We call him O Sensei just because he's the founder, right? And it's a way to kind of separate him from us. So we know who he is, and it's as much a term of endearment now than it is anything else, right? He's O Sensei, but he founded his own system, as I've mentioned before. Kitsune-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu is it's a play on his name, so it's the Reynolds School of Jiu-Jitsu. That's really what it means. Kitsune means fox. If you take Reynolds to its root, Renard is fox, right? So it was more, it wasn't so much that it's just his expression, right? And I don't think it was. I don't think he was looking to be a 10th Dan or to wear a funny belt or anything like that. This was his expression of jiu-jitsu. He fell out with his instructor. They had an argument over kata, of all things, and they decided to part ways. And he started really developing his curriculum. And I kind of went over this in the PKCC thing, but jiu-jitsu and a lot of the martial arts were kind of the same. You went to experts to get knowledge. There was no complete jiu-jitsu system that was kind of transported over here. For example, you study Chito-Ryu, right? Now you're very fortunate because of the work of some really talented pioneers that you have the complete system, and you're taught that way. Back in the day, that just wasn't the case, right? You would you would have to gain the knowledge from different experts and kind of put it all together. So I think that was a function of the pioneering times. So he chose his path. Like I say, with the organization, he was one of these. It's like trying to jam a round peg into a square hole. It didn't work, right? He had to do his own thing. And I tell you, I didn't tell this story on the other podcast, but I got real validation for what he did when I took him to meet. I don't know if you've heard of the Professor Wally J. is one of the preeminent Japanese Jiu-Jitsu instructors, and he did incredible service to Canadian Jiu-Jitsu. He was his first trip here was in 63, 64, and he came dozens of times to help develop Canadian Jiu-Jitsu. But I took him on one of his last tours to Canada. I took Sensei Reynolds to meet him, to see him again. And Sensei came out in his gi, and he was wearing his red belts. He wore a red belt at the time. And Wally J, actually, Professor J, stopped the seminar and started talking to Sensei Reynolds. We just happened to be a couple minutes late. And he spent about 10 minutes talking to Sensei Reynolds, and he said, "You know, Steve, it's about time you had that belt on." He says, "Forrester was holding you back. You're too talented. You should have had that years ago." So for a young student like me, that was like, I mean, I witnessed that personally. I was there, right? Mm-hmm. That's validation for what he did. And the bonus is I got to be Professor Jzuke for the rest of the seminar. So I got hammered around and got the firsthand knowledge. So it was great that way. But again, I digress. As far as my role, in 93, he decided that I would be his inheritor. He said, "We're going to work, and you're going to inherit this from me someday." So I said, "Okay, Sensei, if you want me to do that, we need to really work hard together. I want to organize this. I want to make sure I'm doing what you want." So that's when, I had served as his assistant for a few years, but then we got serious about organizing the curriculum into what we have now. We got serious about making the kata. We have a series of kata that he developed that we do solo and with a partner, both armed and unarmed. And we made a point of going through all of them. Okay, this is what you want. This is because there's always variations, right? Different people have, and you know this as well as anyone. There's every instructor has their own spin on things. So I was keen to be doing what his vision was. So I really, if I had any influence on him whatsoever, it was more around organizing and getting his thoughts down. In 2002, he decided that the inheritance should happen. So I became the chief instructor. He awarded me, we used the Menkyo Kaiden. Menkyo Kaiden is a license of full proficiency that they use in classical Budo Bujutsu. It didn't make sense to give a young man a 10th Dan. That would be silly, right? So he gave me the Menkyo Kaiden to say that I had learned the system, and I was kind of charged with expanding or making it better, I guess. I don't know if better is the right word, but I was. You keep studying, and things will creep in, and you'll make things yours, right? That's part of shuhari, right? You spend a whole bunch of time doing what your sensei tells you, right? You master that form, and then eventually you break from it, or it becomes yours, right? It's the ri part, right? You break from form. Not to even suggest for a minute that I'm at ri or anything like that, but that's the goal, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So would you say then that the art is still evolving? Like, and just speaking from my own experience, I've been involved with Chito-Ryu now for about 10 years and almost 10 years. And in that time, I've seen numerous changes, to different techniques and how things are performed and what the emphasis is and those kinds of things, because Higashi Sensei is forever refining and playing with things, and we're not learning something that's in a time capsule. We're learning something that is constant, that's living, And do you feel that is still happening with your art?
I think you can't help, but I think if you're doing things the same way you were 20, 30, 40 years ago, then you've wasted 20, 30, 40 years, right? I think the art is in evolution. I think you keep searching for your answers, right? No one starts Budo to be a black belt or a champion or even a teacher, right? You don't start Budo for that, right? That calling comes to you later. At least it would be very rare that anyone would start with the idea in mind that I'm going to teach this someday. But I think your Sensei Legacy, who you interviewed last, right? His famous, and I really love the line, the most important title you'll ever have is student, right?
Yeah.
And I agree. Right. I mean, I don't stop learning. We met at the Yellow Brick House seminar. You did the 2 jiu-jitsu classes. While you were doing that, I was on the karate side of the room, and I was learning from folks like Kyoshi Maletsky. We were doing a white crane kata, right? So, I mean, there's always something to learn, right? And you have to. And when I go to Capital Conquest, if I'm not teaching, I'm training, right? And I'm finding people. There, Hanshi Tarian is an amazing man. I mean, he puts together these. Not only has he been very kind to me, but he puts together these amazing experiences where you get to train with people who are experts in their field, right? Through those, I've had the opportunity to train seminars with folks like Hanshi Burkowski, my friend from Germany, Kyoshi Baumhofer, right? From all over the world. And you can do different things. There's a gentleman I always try to train with, Johann Skalberg, who's a Kali stylist, and amazing. And it fits with the jiu-jitsu. You find the way to make it work, right? If, I know in Chito-ryu, I mean, you guys do, we were talking about this before, right? The self-defense sets, so the Goshinjutsu, the Henshuhos, the Nage no Kata, right? It's all very jiu-jitsu-like, right? So people get hung up on their labels, I think, right? If I'm a Kitsune-Ryu Jiu-Jitsu stylist, that's what I studied. My duty is to my sensei to preserve and promote and refine and do all that. But I'm not bound by it either, right? I have studied other arts. I've achieved rank in Goju Ryu Karate. I've done other things I haven't chased for rank, right? The rank I haven't, I mean, I'm not one of these ones that goes out and tries to chase rank. I was very fortunate that Sensei Smith taught me Goju Ryu Karate, and I followed that through to black belts. And I've had that black belt rank for 20 years. I've never bothered going for my Nidan, San, whatever. But I still train the kata, and I still train regularly, right? If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't, right? I'm still going to train the kata. You know, I spent a year in university studying Aikido with Kimita Sensei at the university. That's the guy who brought Yoshinkan Aikido to Canada, right? You can't get better, right? So that had a profound impact. The people at Capital Conquest I mentioned, the Hanshi Sais, the Hanshi Tarian is amazing on the mats. And it's not only the technique that you watch these people do, you watch how they teach. And that's inspiring just as much as anything. Hanshi Tarian, you come out of there, you feel like you could walk on water doing a class with him, right? He never forgets anyone's name. He makes you feel great. He's an incredible motivator, and you follow that. My own instructor, you don't only watch the hard skills, you watch those soft skills. My teacher, Sensei Reynolds, has the ability to connect with anyone from the newest white belt to the highest level black belt in his class. He'll connect with them and he'll make them feel great before they leave, right? So it's the whole picture that you watch, and you can't stop, right? And you have to, I mean, you know what you know, but when you know better, do better. Yeah.
So you mentioned before when you indicated that Sensei Wally J sort of provided vindication for Sensei Reynolds and for yourself and what Sensei Reynolds has developed and achieved and so on. I guess where I'm going with the question is, I'm looking for, is there a proudest moment as a martial artist or an achievement that's most prominent in your mind? from your 41?
A personal achievement, or I mean, I'll always point to my students, right? I have a student, the gentleman I mentioned. I mean, he calls me his sensei, but in reality, he started 2 years after me. He's done amazing things in competition. He's done our kata, two of our signature katas in the several open karate circuits, and won. And he did that at an age when most people are retiring, right? He's 10 years older than me. And he, up until COVID, he took the year before COVID, he's getting ready to spar, basically. He wants to fight next. So, and that's, I mean, he's 10 years older than me. So he's Jack Benny's age too, 39, right? But he inspires me. Because I wouldn't have gone to Spain in 2011 if it wasn't for his example, right? And he's done it on several circuits. So that type of thing inspires me. My students are my greatest achievement. What we've built here at this dojo is the thing I'm proud of most, right? I have a dojo, right? It's not a studio. It's a dojo, right? In its traditional sense. That would be my proudest thing with regards to that. Personal achievements, I survived my black belt test, right? That would probably be up there as well, right? But again, I think when you become a teacher and you kind of dedicate yourself to it, it becomes less about what you do and more about what your students. It's not that I take credit for what my champions have done. I have another lady who competed in two world jiu-jitsu championships, and she won the gold medal in 2004 and 2007. I mean, she far eclipsed anything I did in fighting. I mean, I enjoy fighting, but I was I'm like a fourth line center, right? I'm a grinder when I spar, right? You'll know you've had a match, and I don't generally get outclassed, so, but you'll know you've had a match fighting me. But she went out there and dominated two championships in a row. Any student I've taken to an international competition has medaled in whatever circuit we happen to be following at the time. So. They do that work though. Champions build themselves. I kind of point the way and encourage, right? But I think we're proud of that. I'm probably, like I say, when the dojo, the fact that people stick it out. I mean, I've had people that have been with me. I mean, the gentleman John McLaughlin has been with me he's been with the dojo 39 years now, right? And another student I've taught has been with me since I started teaching, 33 years, right? So I have long-term students. The rest of my black belts are in the 20s somewhere now. So I'm really fortunate that way, that they feel challenged enough to keep coming. And I think I have to keep driving myself forward so that I can give them that knowledge or that drive to keep coming themselves. If I'm not pushing myself forward, then I'm not really setting much of an example for them to strive to go forward. Mm-hmm. And that's why I still get out and train and do everything I can. Even during the pandemic, I mean, there have been some fantastic opportunities to train on Zoom. I've over the past 17 months, I've trained with Hokama Sensei from Okinawa. He's a Goju Ryu stylist. Masuda Sensei is another Goju Ryu stylist from Okinawa. I've trained with a gentleman who impressed me to no end, Houghton Sensei from Florida, who fuses Shotokan Karate and Aikido principle. Yeah. I've trained with Suino Sensei doing sword. We've done World Martial Arts Live. I've done some Kobudo with the Siwiks, my friends from Ottawa. So there's been fantastic opportunities to train if you look for them and push yourself. So I've been careful to keep myself as active as possible too.
Yeah. What about, most prominent eureka moments or epiphanies over your many years of training and teaching, competing?
So I think you have a few of them. Right? I think learning goes in such a way where you start and you make incredible progress, right? Maybe you get your shoulder down, you kind of level off a bit, and then you'll overcome that plateau and you'll kind of do that. And it's usually an epiphany that drives you forward. So the first epiphany, I think, before I got my Shodan, I fell in love. I often say I fell in love with the art at that point, where my dad really didn't have to take me anymore. I was getting on the bus and making my own way to the dojo. So when I could start making throws work and got the leverage down where I could get people up and over easily, then that was an epiphany, right? Okay, this isn't just some, I can do this, right? I just have to keep training. And I think a lot of that, falling in love with the art was as much the students and my peers around me, because we all kind of work together, right? The dojo's a family, right? We kind of push each other to be better. So that really helped me to fall in love with the art. Earning my Shodan and beginning teaching kind of happened around the same time. In retrospect, I was probably far too young to be put in front of a class, but you did what your sensei told you, right? And teaching kind of proved to me that I could get other people to do this, and maybe I could inspire them a little. Okay, I had some pretty good results at the beginning with the people I taught, right? I could see that, okay, I could do that. So that was kind of an epiphany moment. Competing internationally was a big thrill, and I had to wait a little longer. I had intended to do it a lot sooner, but I eventually got that opportunity, and that not getting that opportunity initially ultimately led to me getting involved with the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association, the Ontario Jiu-Jitsu Association, but that's another question or another story. But that was a thrill. To be able to do that. Learning afterwards that one of the people I fought was a professional kickboxer and MMA fighter really kind of threw me for a loop, because he worked his ass off to throw me and couldn't do it. So I felt pretty good as a club amateur fighter that I held off a guy who trains for a living. So that was kind of my victory, right? So that was an epiphany moment. Lately, my epiphanies come from, I think training sword was an epiphany. I spoke about that. Using that grip on the sword is the same as jiu-jitsu when you apply locks and stuff. So I think the sword really opened up an avenue in my practice. I'm not great at it, but I'm enthusiastic about it. So I think it helped my empty hand technique immensely. So that was an epiphany. One of the things I really hammer home when I teach now is kazushi, or off-balancing opponents. The sooner you do that in your technique, one of the things I talked about, I believe in the seminar I taught even, was kazushi on contact, right? If I can make you the earlier I can take your balance, the better my technique is going to be. So that's a concept or idea I've been playing with for a lot of years now, to try and get that better and better and better. So it just finding those efficiencies in your technique, because that's what goes, whoa, okay. My students will tell you now, I really, especially over the last 18 months, we've focused a lot on mechanics and how to get through techniques. The idea that the end shape isn't the most important part of the technique, but the getting there is how you arrive there is just as important. So lots of little things like that keep me going and still fascinate me about the art. So that's probably, if you don't have I don't understand. I think you've probably seen it. People who stop training at Shodan are just, you've invested all this time and really all you know is punching, kicking, and break falling, right? Get in there and you have to keep going and you have to keep driving yourself. It's not the end. So you just push on.
Yeah. So you're talking about, different techniques and honing techniques and so on as part of your, epiphanies and eureka moments and that. Did you have a favorite technique or set of techniques for that you like to teach or you like to demonstrate, or that you would like to pull out when you're in competition?
Yeah, competition may be a little different. Competition, everyone in the dojo had to have a really good, nothing beats a good reverse punch, right? So we all had to have a really good punch, right? So we worked that a lot. I when I was younger, really liked kicking. So when I sparred, I had a few good kicks and a reverse. One of my students said reverse punch like a trip hammer, right? It would hit you when necessary, right? But that's sparring. As far as techniques, physical techniques these days, it's major outer reaping throw is probably my favorite. It's just an outside leg trip. I really, it doesn't require any weight bearing. A quick little balance break, and I'll sweep you. So that was that. When I was younger, I really got chuffed with myself when I could pull off a springing hip throw, Hane Goshi, which is a difficult technique. And I knew I had the leverage when I could pull that off consistently. And that's one of the things that really, it took me about 12 years of training to be able to pull it off with any consistency, and I got pretty good at it. So that was probably one of my favorites. My students will tell you that I really like wrist locks. That's seems to be my bread and butter, but I don't tend to focus on one technique. I think as the nature of my role teaching, I have to be able to do everything relatively okay, right? Even ones I'm not fond of, I have to be able to teach, because that my student might be really take to that technique, or it might be an ideal technique for my students. So I gotta maintain some skill kind of in everything. Choking, shime constriction techniques, among my favorite techniques as well, right? Nothing ends a fight better than putting someone to sleep, take the fight right out of them, and you don't have to hurt them too hard or too badly, right?
Yeah, so it's hard. It's obviously, if training as long as you have, it's hard to pinpoint one or a couple. So that's my students
will tell you it's the wrist locks, right? Because they're on the receiving end of it all the time.
Yeah. Well, the seminar that I attended that you taught was all about that as well, and I do recall being on the receiving end a couple of times. So. Very, very, very impressive. I remember thinking to myself, it's like, oh, wow, that was pretty smooth. So picking up on what you'd said something before about you got when you earned your Shodan, you were in your teenage years. And
I was the youngest. Yeah, I was the youngest here. I had to wait to the year I turned 16, but I was 15 actually when I received the rank.
Right. So it was the year that you turned 16, yeah. So, and then you also, you mentioned that, you started teaching at around that same time, but you felt that maybe in retrospect, maybe you were put in that position a little early perhaps, or you weren't maybe quite suited for it yet. I guess where I'm going with this is question I like to ask as many people as I can about, what does a Shodan mean to you? And I guess as somebody who's been an instructor as long as you have, I'd be really interested in your insights on that.
Yeah, I think the notion of a Shodan has changed considerably over the years. I think at one time that was the expert. You were an expert if you got your Shodan, right? That was the black belts were something, right? The generation before me, so we talked about Mr. Howard, we talked about Mr. Smith. Those were the guys just getting their black belts as I started, and they were the experts, right? And those are the guys you looked up to. And never mind Sensei Reynolds. He was 4th, 5th dan, whatever he was at the time I started. He walked on water, right? That was amazing. Of course, when you start, that's sort of the impression you have, and then as you go on, of course, you realize that they're learning the same as you are, just at a different level, right? There's more to learn. In my dojo, Shodan would be when I award Shodan, I usually liken it to the end of an apprenticeship, right? You've learned your basics. You know how to punch, kick. You can take a fall. You can do some throwing. It's like you become a student when you get. And I know that sounds glib or cliche, but really and truly, that's kind of the goal, right? It's your first real hard test, right? It's probably the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. In my dojo, it lasts the weekend, right? The Friday night, you do a written examination. Usually you get the Saturday off, and then the Sunday we come back and we do the physical portion of the test, which can last most of the day, right? And we put you through you basically do everything you've done, right? So we take the whole curriculum and you do the whole curriculum as part of your test. Yeah. Now, really and truly, the student's ready before they do the test, or you wouldn't be putting them up to it. The test is for them to show them. You got to break, maybe you're breaking some preconceived notions, or you're doing something like that, right? You want to push them through self-perceived limitations, I guess, right? But it's almost like doing a rite of passage, right? You're becoming a young man or a young lady in the art, or that type of thing. In my own situation, do I look back? I think maybe I had the physical skill to do the test, or I wouldn't have passed, right? I knew the techniques and the kata and the requirements. Should I have been teaching? I was kind of an anomaly. No one really knew what to do with me at the time because I was the only kid that got that far. So I was always treated as a little adult, right? So I knew no different. And when you start teaching, of course, you do what your senseis did. You follow the example that was set. And I wasn't always the nicest guy to people. I still believed in that hard mentality. It wasn't above me to wrap someone on the leg with a shinai or push people perhaps in the wrong way. The motivation was perhaps not correct, but you learn. I was challenged a lot, to be sure. I mean, I was only a scrawny. I mean, I wasn't nearly as big as I am now, right? I was a scrawny 15-year-old kid, so my technique had to work, and I was challenged a lot by the adults. So obviously it worked. I'm still here, but I probably lost more students than I should have along the way, and that's probably a big regret. And it was just my own immaturity, right? And as you get older, like I've said a few times, right? You do what you know, and then when you know better, you do better, right? And you learn, right? If you just keep doing the same thing, it's like these people who stop training at Shodan or stop training once they teach. You have to push yourself to be a good teacher. Teaching is different from training, right? You have to push yourself to be a better teacher. And I mean, since I got my black belt, I've done all sorts through my work. I've done all sorts of leadership courses, and you study people that do it really well. So when I go to a capital conquest, I'm not only watching their hard physical skills, I'm watching how they teach, and I want to make myself better. And I still do that to this day, right? If I can teach something better, I'm going to do it. If I can be a better person, you do the best you can. Coaching courses, right? One of the benefits of getting involved with organized sport is that you have the access to things like the national coaching programs, and you can leverage these ideas on leadership, right? And do better. That's what it's about.
Good. So in your opinion, then, just a follow-up question to the Shodan question, do you think there should be, sorry, I'll back up a little bit. You mentioned that it's kind of like a rite of passage, or at least in your own experience. And in your own experience, you had to be in your 16th year in order to challenge for it. Do you think there should be a minimum age to receive Shodan? And if so, would it be around 16, or do you think there's variation on that?
I think it depends. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I know a lot of people have different ideas on it. In my dojo, 16 seems to work. Even if it takes about 7 or 8 years to get a black belt in my dojo. The curriculum is pretty big, so it takes time to get the technical syllabus down. And it's probably I probably have too big a technical syllabus at Q belt, but it takes that time to do it. I have awarded in my time a couple of junior black belts, meaning they have the physical skills to what I believe a junior black belt could do. But that was done with a lot of consideration, a lot of thought. I think 16 just fits for what we do. I know some people award black belts early. I think it really depends on what it is in your dojo. If you're starting to teach at Shodan, Shodan used to be the expert. You started teaching. You were a black belt expert, so overnight apparently, right? But you started teaching. In my dojo, teaching is an apprentice thing. I really start people off slowly teaching. Maybe they lead a part of the warm up to start as a brown belt or something, or even working. Jiu-Jitsu, the dojo is a very community-driven environment here anyway. I know a lot of dojos, bigger dojos to be sure, have belt level specific classes, right? So if you're a beginner, you attend these particular classes, intermediate and advanced. I have a small dojo, so I train everyone together, and the high belts help the low belts, and we all work together to get better, right? The high belts impart their technical knowledge, and the low belts, by learning, help the high belts do that, right? So it's like a symbiotic relationship. You help each other get better at different skills, but we're all here to help each other. The funny part that happens when someone's getting ready to challenge for black belt here is everyone works together to help that person succeed, and that's kind of the most impressive thing to me as the teacher, to sit back and watch, is everyone wants this person to be successful and pass. So they work together to help them. Students will volunteer to take extra throws or help practice technique with them, right? And just you kind of build that camaraderie through someone getting ready for the black belt. So I mean, again, I can only speak for my dojo. I know different people have different philosophies. I just think 16 seems to be, mind you, a 16-year-old today is probably different than when I was 16, right? Or you were 16. We probably had more responsibility on our shoulders earlier. I mean, I was working at my company when I was 16, right? And had more than one job, in fact. So again, it is what it is in your dojo, and you find your path. In my dojo, 16 seems to work, right? And no one's done it. No one's done it since. Right? I still the youngest to ever do it. So it's just the way it's worked out, not through any great plan or anything.
So, a question for you about tradition in training. I'm curious, especially given the evolution, I guess, of the art that you, the version of jiu-jitsu that you practice. What are your thoughts on the importance of tradition in training? Is it a critical component to understanding, or is it some would say it could be characterized as cultural appropriation? All the bowing and stuff when there's it's not a part of our traditionally, at least, not a part of Western culture to do that, and with all the the titles and everything in I guess in our case the Japanese titles and so on. Do you think, or if you do think, what is the role or the importance of tradition in training?
That's a heck of a question, and it's again, I can only give what works for us or works for me. I think what's important. I think Reigi Saho or etiquette is important, to be sure. I think you're studying a potentially deadly martial art. There has to be some sort of code of ethics when you're practicing. You could seriously hurt someone, right? So it provides. It's almost like controlling the class, right? In a way. I don't think it's a bad thing for children to learn Reigi Saho these days. I think respect is important. Honor, respect, all the soft skills, right? You think of the 7 virtues of the samurai, right? That's not a bad thing for children to be infused with. But my dojo, I tend to take a middle path with things. To an MMA club, I might seem like a very traditional, sort of staunch traditionalist or a classical martial artist to a classical martial artist to I might seem really open, right? I'm not that traditional at all. In my dojo, one of the things, I've done these 2 podcasts now. That's probably the first time my students have ever heard my ranks listed out, unless they went looking for it, right? Certainly, none of them would know that I hold a Kyoshi title or whatever, right? I mean, it's not something I use in the dojo. I am sensei, right? And that's what they call me, and that's fine. Outside the dojo, I don't expect it, right? But some of them some of the long-serving students will call me Doug, right? Outside the mess, it's just I don't insist on things like that. But a lot of them still call me sensei. Some of them never used my first name ever in their life. With my own sensei, I've never called him. It's not like I go, "Yo, Steve," right? That's never happened. It's always sensei, or if I'm among people, it's O Sensei, right? He has a nickname. We call him Pappy sometimes, or we call him the old man, right? It's those are just nicknames that have come up over the years, but always the respect is there, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Cultural appropriation. I think there's a lot of I've seen a lot of people overdo stuff with titles and some of it, and I think it's where you approach it from. I think, right? I'm never going to be Japanese, right? I'm always going to be a Canadian of Scottish descent, right? Well, a proud Canadian at that. But by honoring the traditions and honoring the culture it comes from, I do my best to pronounce the Japanese correctly. If I've been mangling the Japanese and a Japanese speaker corrects me, I make a conscious decision to correct that, so that I'm showing honor to the origin, right? And I do that with any language. If I'm studying with a Kung Fu person who teaches me the proper way to say a Chinese word, for example, then I'm going to do that. Or a Korean person with Taekwondo or something like that, right? You always try to show the respect. On a practical level, the tradition and the reigi saho, the etiquette, is a useful way, and putting a gi on and tying a belt is a useful way to separate what happens outside to what's inside. The dojo, in a lot of ways, is a throwback to a simpler time. There's no technology in the dojo other than Zoom right now, but I joke with my students that's getting a sledgehammer when this is all over. But there's no technology in the dojo. We don't have our phones. We're not taking texting while we're training, right? It's a way to separate the outside world from what we do inside. And for an hour and a half, all you have to do is what your sensei tells you, or train, right? Depending on whether it's class or training or what you happen to be doing. But just on a practical level, by putting that gi on, by bowing into the mat, remembering you have to call certain people sensei or senpai or whatever you use, then it's a practical separation, right? And it puts your mindset in that frame of mind that you need. The etiquette helps you keep a proper mindset. When we're practicing with weapons, or we're practicing throws or takedowns, if your mind wanders, you could get hurt. So on a practical level, having these ways to control class, or these ideas, it's just a practical separation to keep your mindset where it should be. Like I said, I tend to take a middle path with it all. I'm more concerned that people show each other respect. I think there are a lot of people that overdo it. I think there's people who are silly about it. How many Sokis and things like that are there out there, right? With guys younger than me with girdle-sized belts and doing silly things. I mean, there's people that overdo these things, and that's not a new phenomenon, right? I mean, that's happened for years. I can remember when I was a young man competing at some of the open karate tournaments. There was a gentleman from the United States. The students would kiss his ring before they went and competed or something. It's just silliness, like cultish behavior. Well, and yeah. I don't think there's a place for that, and I think that's like to the extreme overdone. Mm-hmm. But I think as long as you keep it in its place, and as long as you're showing honor to the culture with which from where it comes, I think it's a very practical thing. I think it's, and I think a lot of the fight clubs that are looser, perhaps with tradition, are recognizing that you need a way to, if you're going to teach children where your bread and butter is, you need something that's going to teach the honor, the respect, the integrity. So I think everyone's getting to I think eventually you get there. You're not just a fight club, right? There's if you don't have the etiquette and the art part, really all you're teaching is violence, right? How to dismantle a human body, right? And that's, I don't know where the value in that necessarily is, right? Unless you're in the military or a law enforcement professional.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, what you just said there about violence, that's almost exactly what Sensei Burkowski said. He said, he asked me a rhetorical question. He said, what is karate without tradition? Violence. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, really and truly, what you're doing is potentially, I mean, some of the, my instructor was a military man, and oftentimes after we would learn hand-to-hand combat techniques, that was one of his fortes, right? So we would learn things that I shouldn't know, right? That no person should really need in daily life, right? Like how to take sentries out on guard duty and things like that without, so you take them out without drawing attention to yourself. I mean, I don't need to know that. It's a cool technique, don't get me wrong, but again, it's, you got it. When I named this dojo, and I'm probably going to digress a little here, right? We taught more than one Budo here, right? So we taught the Tai Chi and the Qigong, and Sensei Smith was still actively teaching Goju Ryu Karate here. I taught Jiu-Jitsu, so we called it a Budokan, right? The idea that more than one style was taught here, right? But I did have a conscious reason for naming it Budokan, and it's the idea that this is a way of life. Martial arts is a way of life. It's been my life for 41 years. I can't remember a time where I didn't do jiu-jitsu, right? It's very difficult for me to remember that now. And the do or the path or the way is what's important, right? I think you always approach it with a practical bent, right? You never lose sight that this is martial, right? That you are learning maybe civil defense or self-defense, right? And not the military arts per se, but at its heart as well, this is a way of life if you look for it and you're taught it, right? So the do part, or the sort of the philosophy, the big picture is very important to me. The Budo in its larger sense is very important to me. Again, I don't get hung up on labels. If I generalize what I do as Budo, right? I try to teach. I wouldn't be, again, that sounds very arrogant, but I try to teach the whole picture as best I can, whether it be by example or explicitly teaching.
Yeah. So not the art just for the art's sake. It's a practical component is at the core always, right?
Yeah, you have to approach this from a practical point of view, right? If you lose sight of the practical, I think you lose something. This is not dance or yoga or anything like that, right? Not that there's anything wrong with dance or yoga or anything like that, and you can make a life doing those things, I suppose. But never lose sight of what's practical in your training, right? And you may explore other ideas, like some of the Kazushi on contact work I do looks silly until you feel it, but I never lose sight of what's practical, right? A good right cross or a good right reverse punch is going to do the job, right? Rather than angling someone the right way, right? You gotta keep the practical in mind always.
So looking back on your 40 plus years of experience, is there anything that you know now that you wish you had learned sooner?
Everything I did got me to this point, so that's a kind of a difficult one. I would have liked to have been more mature when I started teaching, for sure. It bothers me sometimes that I didn't always treat people the way they should have been treated, right? And part of that was me trying to prove myself as a martial artist and a teacher. But you learn better. But as far as learning principle, I think you learn things when you're ready to learn them, right? In the physical sense, right? When you're ready, the teacher appears, is the old saying, right? But
Yeah.
I would have liked to have done sword sooner, to be sure. Again, I'm probably more enthusiastic about it than skilled at it, but it really impacted my jiu-jitsu in a positive way. Aikido did the same. Studying Goju Ryu Karate, again, everything I've studied came together at the right time. I'm really fortunate that my sensei is a really open-minded guy, and I mean, I still stay in touch with him about things I want to do or things I explore, or going to Capital Conquest and doing things like that. And he's always been really supportive, right? And where some instructors, oh no, you can't divert from our style or anything like that. He's always been a really open guy, and of course that comes from his own upbringing and his own experience. So he's been really patient, and he's been really good with me about things like that. So I think you get to where you got to go. I think you get to where you get when you're supposed to get there. I guess is the way. But if I had one thing I would have liked to have been mature sooner, which is kind of weird I was only 15, 16, right? So. But you do what you do, right? And at the end of the day, I can sleep on my pillow at night knowing I've always tried my best, right?
So is there anything that you can kind of put your finger on, as a summary, or maybe it's a long list of things, I don't know, but what would you say the martial arts has given you?
I think, I mean, the simple answer would be probably everything, but the self-confidence. I mean, this hasn't been my living, and my sensei was clear that you should have a paycheck, and I agree. I'm glad I had a paycheck, especially over COVID. So I don't make my living doing this. I keep it in its balance, right? Everything has to have a little balance. For me, it's very much a labor of love, and it's given me self-confidence, I think, to do other things in my job, to be sure, and my work with the association, to be sure. Just genuinely trying to do good by people. I think a lot of that, the respect, it sounds very arrogant to actually say. People always remark that I'm a pretty humble guy, or I'm a quiet, humble guy. If I didn't have the confidence to be that way, I mean, I know what I can do, and I know I'm functional, right? I can do stuff, but I don't need to advertise it. And I just do what I do. You want to see what I can do? Let's go on the mats and train together and have some fun, right? And that's that comes from having a bit of confidence. There's a great Japanese word that I'm fond of, and it really encapsulates a lot of what I think or how I approach what I do. The word is intoku, I-N-T-O-K-U, intoku. And sort of the flippant translation is secret charity, but the idea is to do good in secret. You don't always have to say, oh, I'm the best, look at what I did, or I've been the president for 10 years, or I led this through COVID, or I did... I know what I've done, and there are people, in a lot of cases, it's always a team sort of sport. It's a team effort for these things, but I don't need to draw attention to myself. My parents played a lot in that too. Always taught not to cast up, right? Don't cast yourself up to people because you've done something, right? Good, bad, or ugly, right? Just do it and be happy you've done it. And you do that for your students, right? I have a bunch of students that have come to me for help, and I've always done my best to help them. But again, that's between me and the student. I don't need to cast that up. And once it's done, it's done. We don't, unless they talk about it, I don't need to talk about it. Like, remember what I did for you, right? There's nothing like that. You do your good, and you know what you did. So I think that's born of confidence as well. And a lot of, it's hard to separate my life from martial arts, right? I mean, I've been doing it too long, right? It's in my muscle memory physically, it's in my mindset mentally. how you do anything is how you do everything. And I approach life, and that's another one I got from the legacy folks at PKCC, right? And how I'm always approaching it with the martial arts that I've trained in mind, right? The jiu-jitsu and the other arts that I've trained. I can't look at things without a martial artist's lens now. It's impossible. Right? And not to sound arrogant or anything like that. It's just, that's fact. I've been doing it too long. This is my life, right? My career, so to speak, is set up so I can do this, right? I've held myself back in my career from management roles and probably more money and other things so that I have the balance to be able to do this at night. I have a spouse who's very supportive of what I do. Is involved in running the business, and with another student, she looks after the wellness stuff here. She runs her business out of here. So if I didn't have that support, right, then life would be out of balance, wouldn't it? So again, I can't not look at things that way. I always look at the lens of what I've done in my jiu-jitsu.
I have to say, I was looking forward to this conversation, and I really enjoyed the meeting you the first time at the seminar, and when I watched you on the Punch Kick Choke Chat podcast, and I felt like I got to know you a little bit more, and this evening as well through our conversation, there's a couple more nuggets in there as well, and it's very obvious that you've been a student, of not just the martial arts but of life. Like you've pulled a lot of experiences from a lot of different areas, and I like how you kind of frame everything in the martial approach, to life, and with purpose, with practicality, kind of as at the core. So. Really appreciate your agreeing to do this, and on a selfish note, I hope that at some point soon I'll be able to get twisted up in knots with you again. Or by you, I should say, not with you, by you again. When things become a bit more open, and hopefully they stay open. Is there anything you want to add that we haven't covered, or details around, where people can find you and your dojo and that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, first, let me say it's been an honor to chat to you tonight. I said this before. I'm just a guy doing Budo, and again, when I talk about myself, this is probably the most between the two podcasts. This is the most anyone's ever heard me speak, let alone speak about myself. My own teacher, when we talked after PKCC, he was like, "That's the most I've ever heard you talk about yourself." And I know you, right? I mean, he knows me just about better than anyone. My father, much the same. So it's been an honor. And usually when I talk about myself, I'm just a guy doing Budo. And as far as my rank, I'm ranker than some, but not quite as rank as others. It's just I train. So it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. I hope it's interesting enough for folks. But as far as finding me, I'm at my dojo, the Richmond Hill Budokan. You can Google search that, and I'm happy to. Anyone's welcome here anytime. The door to this place is always open, and I hope I get the chance very soon to get out and train again through things like Capital Conquest. And I know our mutual friend from Satori, Dariush, is looking at more seminars like he did before. So hopefully we'll all get together and train again, which will be awesome. So again, I thank you very much, and it's been a real pleasure talking tonight. I can't believe where the time's gone. So thank you again. That's awesome.
All right, thank you, and stay well, and we'll be chatting again soon, I'm sure.
For sure. My best to everyone. Thank you very much.